Hello, and welcome to today's EdNet Virtual Roundtable, Open Source, Implications for Schools, Implications for Vendors. I am Jordan Tripp, your moderator, and this roundtable is produced by the Heller Reports, a QED company. Page 4 of your handout provides information regarding how you may participate in today's discussion in the Q&A periods. Please be aware you may call in and get in queue at any time during the broadcast, ready to be called upon in the question period following each speaker. Now, let me welcome Dr. Nelson Heller, President and Publisher of the Heller Reports and host of today's roundtable. Welcome, Nelson.
Thanks, Jordan, and welcome everyone to today's discussion of open source, what it means for schools and education market vendors. When most of us first heard about open source software, it probably seemed something of interest only to geeks, nerds, and IT junkies in the operating system arena. Today, to quote a recent issue of BLE Group's SuperTech News, open source is fundamentally changing the way much of technology is done. Open source software's computer code remains in the public domain, as opposed to being owned by private interests and kept secret. In K-12, open source is being felt in school IT infrastructure, especially in network server technology, but it's increasingly a factor on the desktop and in learning systems. In other words, in the content space. While open source apps and software are generally free, support, training, and hardware to use it all cost money. This dynamic is changing the competitive landscape and causing many firms to reassess their traditional business models. In today's program, we're going to look at this trend and try to give you a better handle on how serious it is and what it means for you. And we've got a great panel to help us out and to answer our questions. In the order in which they'll be presenting, our first panelist is Vijay Sonty, Deputy Superintendent and Chief Information Officer of the School Board of Broward County, Florida. Broward is the sixth largest public school system in the country with over 274,000 students and an annual budget of over $4 billion. There are two reasons we're especially fortunate to have Vijay with us today. First, because before coming to Broward, Vijay was Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of the Interpublic Group of Companies, the world's largest advertising and marketing communications company, with annual sales of over $6.2 billion. So he brings a world-class perspective on IT to the needs of K-12. And second, because he's become one of the more consequential K-12 users and voices regarding open source technology. Our second panelist is Paige Gravely, the manager of the Global Education Program for Red Hat, Inc. Founded in 1994, Red Hat is the world's leading open source and Linux provider. Its business model is selling software as a service, and business is good. For example, subscribers have grown from 100,000 in the first quarter of 2004 to 190,000 in the second quarter of 2005. According to IDC, sales of servers running Linux rose 44% last year to $4.2 billion and are projected to reach $9.3 billion by 2009. In contrast, Unix system sales are flat and are expected to stay that way to 2009. For Windows servers, there's been a dramatic increase in the use of open source code as well. Paige spearheads Red Hat's education market initiatives for both K-12 and higher ed, so brings to our panel the experience of interacting with countless educational institutions exploring, piloting, and adopting open source technology. Our final panelist of this wonderful group is Jimmy Wales, President of the Wikimedia Foundation. It's hard not to have heard about the remarkable Wikipedia, the biggest multilingual open access encyclopedia on the Internet. Wiki materials are square in the middle of the open source content space and now include Wikibooks, including open textbooks, Wiki Junior books for children, and a Wiktionary. Started in January of 2001. By yesterday, when I checked the Wikipedia's homepage, its content tally included over 836,000 articles in English, over 321,000 in German, and over 1 million in other languages, including Chinese and Portuguese. And with us again as co-facilitator is Ann Wujcik, managing editor of the Heller Reports news publications and a member of the Heller QED market research staff. Welcome, Ann. So let us go directly to Vijay Sonty, our first panelist, Deputy Superintendent and Chief Information Officer from the School Board of Broward County. And Vijay, we welcome you. Vijay, if you're muted, then unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Nelson, thank you for the introduction, and it's actually a great pleasure to participate in the virtual roundtable on open source. I think I'm really excited to share some of my comments, and today what I would like to share with the audience would include what's different about open source software, the companies to bet on when it comes to open source, how organizations like the K-12 organizations can use open source products, what would be the right deployment strategy, and when the districts deploy open source, which vendors can really help, and what does open source mean to the software industry, and then also talk about some recommendations, and finally talk about open source in Broward and what we're doing with open source and how we're utilizing open source products in Broward. So let me get started with a quick overview. As we all know, I think open source and Linux is gaining some great momentum, and it's going mainstream. And IT executives are embracing Linux and open source because they're very cost sensitive, and open source provides some compelling economics. So open source is clearly making some major headway into data centers and is also gaining a very strong footing in the enterprise. Open source software isn't new to the technology geeks, and if you sit back and look, it's already anchoring most of the internet, and it runs more web servers than any proprietary alternative that's out there. So a very unique proposition and with many benefits. So let's kind of jump right into it and talk about some of the differences between open source and other commercially available software. In fact, there are many differences, and one of the key difference would be the whole development of open source and open source products. I think if you look at it, it's more of a scientific method which leads to better software, and the reasoning behind that is clearly when you open it to a large group, you're basically able to get better published results, and peer review leads to a better software. And some of the areas where actually there are more rewards than risks with open source, those areas would be low cost, looking at nominal fees. The price point is very attractive, and you're basically paying some minimal fees, which is again spent towards distribution and support. Higher quality, given the large developer base. Looking at the source code, you're able to resolve problems and attend to bug fixes in a very timely manner. And also a wide choice. I think it opens up many hardware, software platforms, and also gives users more control over the hardware as to the preferred choice of platform. And then clearly, I think it also leads to an area where with the consortium working on developing open source, there's less likelihood that you would end up with a dead-end software where actually projects are failing because you have a lot of coding volunteers, and those are also some of the risks actually when more benefits than risks, and one of the key risks is actually fragmentation. And when many developers are writing code, you need to be careful as to which path on the fork you take. But again, many ways to overcome that too. So those are some of the key areas where maybe clearly the rewards outweigh the risks. Then also other differences would be licensing. It's typically free, and the only costs are usually with documentation and support and any commercial add-ons that vendors put on top of the basic open source software. So what also open source does is opens up a whole array of choices, and clearly today we'll hear from some of the distributors like Red Hat, and clearly there's Novell that also plays in that market. Big support from major hardware vendors like Dell, HP, IBM, and also software vendors, enterprise software vendors like SAP and Oracle jumping on the bandwagon, and also traditional system integrators, and also many outsourcers that are jumping on the bandwagon. From my perspective, I would say like the companies, the open source to bet on would be clearly Linux, which has big support from IBM, HP, Dell, and basically on all types of servers. Apache, which has a huge market share and hosts 70% of the public internet sites. PHP, a web scripting language, or server-side programming language, which is very natural and goes along with Apache. MySQL gaining some huge market share when it comes to relational databases, again sponsored and touted by Dell and Sun Microsystems. IBM's Eclipse, which is a developer workbench with over 200 plus vendors supporting that. Firefox, a very nice web browser, and JBoss, which is a J2EE app server. So when organizations are looking at open source, there are many things to do, and we are actually noticing open source, which is already embedded in many of our systems, and Linux is popping all over in storage subsystems, networking appliances, and we are unaware of it. Actually, Linux being free and reliable, hardware vendors are utilizing this opportunity and actually building applications, and so it becomes a hardware vendor's responsibility. So using embedded open source is a big plus for school districts. Also considering open source as a commodity platform, the sweet spot clearly is a Linux OS, Apache web server, and PHP scripting language. So what's going to happen is if you are a Unix shop today, you will be a Linux shop tomorrow, and that's because you already have the basic skills and procedures, and the applications port very easily from a Unix environment to Linux. And we have some well-known documented case studies like Amazon, which moved from Solaris to Linux and was able to reduce their technology capital budget by 25%. So we're seeing more vendors embracing open source, and we're also seeing many tools that are popping up. So from a school perspective, I would say if you were to look at open source products, make sure the vendor developer has at least 2 or 3 stable releases of the platform. They have a clear leadership and also good support from the hardware vendors. And what's the right deployment strategy? I would say basically take your best people, create an open source competency center, and treat the open source deployment more rigorously than commercial ones, because your costs for deployment of open source comes from labor and not from software licensing. So if you're don't modify the open source code if you're not willing to join the community. And the vendors that can really help, again, clearly are the infrastructure giants, HP and IBM, a very good bet. Again, Red Hat, SUSE, which is Novell's product, clearly help standardize Linux distribution. So what open source will do to the software industry is something we have to wait and see. Open source is clearly gobbling up a lot of market share when it comes to applications and middleware tools. And they're also giving commercial app servers from SAP, BEA, IBM run for their money. And again, clearly Microsoft, it's a threat to Microsoft also. So what I predict is Microsoft will eventually accept open source development and allow Windows to run on any box, and you'll see IP phones and different servers running Windows and embracing open source. So quickly, I would say, again, from my perspective, for a K-12 environment or a very large school district, I would avoid Linux on the desktop. And the reasoning behind that is I would support Microsoft Windows because currently there's a large, broader support from ISV and systems integrator and help desk support standpoint. And Microsoft Office is clearly the leader, and OpenOffice still has some document compatibility issues. Large districts like ours are able to get the whole Office suite for $15 a unit or $15 a machine, which is very attractive. So will open source really destroy industry giants? I would say not really, but what will happen is we'll see the open source revolutionizing how software markets are moving, and we'll see big companies, the giants' revenue streams moving from licensing to more a service and support feature. So my recommendations in conclusion to school districts would be to try to recognize the real opportunities as what open source brings and what products are out there, and clearly see if they make sense to your environment. Establish some kind of criteria for evaluating open source products. Make sure you use Linux and open source technologies as a competitive negotiating weapons. And also my prediction would be that right now the K-12 environments are looking at Unix are under the radar. 06, 07 is when we'll start experimenting, and also 08 and beyond is when we're actually deploying many applications. So Broward's implementation, we basically have a very nice implementation where we use open source-based tools and services, and that's for supporting our NOC, which is our Networks Operations Center, partnering with JDL, who basically we have outsourced our NOC monitoring to JDL. They are using products like Groundwork for managing and monitoring all our networking devices. So that's our jump into the open source arena, and we're very comfortable with that approach. And this way, I think we are holding our integration partner responsible and lowering our internal support costs, and also with knowledge transfer, our partner is able to do a skills transfer to our staff, and we're also reducing our in-house maintenance and deployment efforts. So that's where we are, and we're looking at many open source products, and our transition is first to open standards and then to open source. And
Vijay, I'm going to jump in here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So we can get to some of these issues through questions from our audience.
Okay.
And Jordan, would you please just review quickly how members of the audience can ask questions of Vijay or any of the other panelists?
If you would like to ask a question, please press 0, then the 1 key on your touch-tone phone. This will place you into a queue. One by one, the lines will be open, so you may each ask your question. So again, that's 0, 1.
Thanks. While we're waiting for audience questions, I'd like to start with one, Vijay.
Okay.
Of course, you've made a rather dramatic transition from the commercial world and a world-class organization to school system, a very large school system. And I'm curious about what your sense is of where technology is at the data center level, enterprise level, and desktop applications level in Broward or in the other school systems that you've encountered, and maybe you can kind of flesh that out by also saying something about the penetration of open source in those areas.
Great. I think surely. I think big difference from the public sector, between public sector and the private sector. And at Broward, like any other typical K through 12 school district, I think our technology budgets are constrained, and we are seeing the pressure. So we're kind of being forced to look at other alternatives. And clearly, the open source is a great path when it comes to many hardware options, being able to use different servers, and also Linux opens up the equation where we're able to lower our operating systems costs. But the real challenge is support and services, and for a school district, they're still in a transition period where we're cautiously looking at open source. So this is where partnering with vendors, and I would say that Broward is able to jump into the open source arena by partnerships. And to give you an overview, like our NOC application currently, we were using products like HP's OpenView and IBM's Tivoli. Very, very costly. It takes a large internal staff to support. And by moving to an application, open source application like Groundwork, we're able to lower our cost. And it also has the right hooks into Tivoli and HP OpenView. So we're able to actually, since it is an open framework that Groundwork uses, we're able to take these open source software and drive a fundamental change in how applications are built and delivered. So it has the hooks into OpenView and Tivoli, and we're able to create some fancy dashboards which help us monitor our 110,000 plus devices. So it's happening, and in our case, we are taking the route where we want to concentrate on applications, and clearly the operating system, Linux, is very solid, and that's the path we're taking.
Thanks, Vijay.
Vijay, I'm really a novice in this arena, so this may be a dumb question, but you spoke about, right now, not open source or Linux at the desktop. So essentially, for the next couple years, will your classroom teachers see any difference, and is there a point at which it does move to the desktop?
Okay, I think our caution there is again, since we're a big Apple, we basically have 75% Apples and 25% Intel-based PCs in our environment when it comes to the desktop. Mm-hmm. We feel that Microsoft has come up with a very attractive price point for Microsoft Office, which is $15 a unit. That's unbeatable. But at the same time, OpenOffice is making some big enhancements, and there's a possibility we would shift to OpenOffice, because if you do the math, 100,000 units at $15 per unit, we're spending $1.5 million on just Microsoft Office. So that could change over a 2-year period. But right now, given the training that is needed and the fear of embracing a new desktop productivity tool kind of scares people. On the operating system side, I think if we move to OpenOffice, we would definitely even jump to Linux on the desktop, because that's a great combination. So we are cautiously watching that. And I think we'll be there in a year or two when it comes to the desktop. I know the schools that BLE's report talks about, few schools that are doing this, but they're doing it on a very small scale. You're looking at 1,500 or maybe 5,000 units. And for a large organization like ours, when you have 110,000 desktops and laptops, the change is not that easy. So we would want to take a structured approach, come up with a blueprint, and slowly embrace open source on the desktop. But on the server side, on the application side, it's an easy transition because we do have Unix-based servers and we have the staff that's already supporting the back-end applications.
Thank you.
Vijay, this is Nelson coming in again, and I'd like to also invite those of you in the audience who are listening to share your experience with school districts' consideration or use of open source in these Q&A periods. Vijay, you know that our audience are vendor, manufacturer, software, publisher organizations that serve schools. So let's take one end of the spectrum, a publisher that has curricular scope content. If you were the business development or strategic planning person in one of those multinational organizations, what would you be telling them about what they should be thinking about open source now and down the road?
Yeah, I think the decisions clearly are made at the CIO level when it comes to embracing new applications, and for the vendors to be able to address the CIO's dilemma, I think would be talking about best in class and the size of the user base. Talk about the core development effort that's going into building these open source products. Talk about the vendor's track record, the basic underlying foundation, the architecture that is in place, and all that creates an interest on the CIO side to work with this unique publishing company. So by partnering with the biggies who already have embraced open source, like the IBMs, the HPs, they'll be able to bring a better solution because school districts are looking for a complete turnkey solution. Embracing open source is a challenge given the limited resources and the skill sets. But if a vendor is able to come up with a complete solution, we are willing to look at that. And clearly, as I had mentioned earlier, like if a vendor has a stable product and is a clear leader and is backed by the hardware vendor, we will definitely look at their product. And I think from an overall TCO standpoint, there are a lot of benefits for that. So the decisions, yes, the CIO can easily be swayed, and so let's hear the plus points, the features, how mature the product is, and the service and support that exists with it, and that will open up the CIOs to be more flexible and look at the price performance, the functionality feature, the features that the new product offers, and the savings that go with it.
Well, thanks, Vijay. Let's broaden our discussion now by inviting you, Paige, to join us and share some of your experience with educational institutions that you've been involved with. So, Paige Gravely, Manager of the Global Education Program at Red Hat, over to you.
Thank you, Nelson, and thank you, Hello Reports and QED, for inviting me to join and offer essentially my personal observations kind of at a macro level, simply based on my interactions with schools and companies serving the EDU market. Certainly an exciting field to be in this kind of open source culture. People who know me certainly would never say that I am a geek, a nerd, and thank goodness not a junkie of any degree. And I think you just got an immense number of bright and exciting companies joining this culture. My role at Red Hat is essentially at a tactical level of helping guide Red Hat's service into the EDU space and K-12 and higher ed schools across the world. It is we've only, even though kind of open source, the genesis of open source certainly comes from the EDU community, and we feel a specific responsibility and bond to that community. But as a vertical, it's pretty new industry for us to be serving. A lot of similarities and certainly differences I'll touch on. I think in terms of defining open source, I think many companies have to decide in terms of the implications in their role is how do they define it? As Linux, for example, which is kind of our core technology that we're focused on. Linux is to open source as Cabernet is to wine. It's just a variety that is an offshoot of this process of developing software. But this model of participation is pretty exemplary, and it's really certainly an emerging, I think, very much an emerging technology. When you look at its relative youthful age, the landscape is still very wide open as to the direction that this will all evolve into, and I don't think that will ever be static. I think there will be a continually evolving and moving landscape as the nature of how software is developed and the roles that companies have to decide if and how they're going to participate in this culture. You look at Red Hat, we're essentially less than 10 years old. Oracle, for example, is 30 years old. And I think right now, as far as vendors such as ourselves, we're all very much niche players. Red Hat's focus is on Linux and specifically on the enterprise architecture. MySQL, even though, as Vijay mentioned, a highly popular open source database. I think they have something over 6 million installs, but as a company, they're under 300 employees, and I think do less than $40 million in revenue. So there is certainly we all have our kind of unique roles right now that we're playing, and even though we at Red Hat were kind of one of those first to market, and certainly proud of our participation in if minimally legitimizing open source resources such as Linux, there's still so much more we can do, especially for the EDU community. We are essentially a service company. We are kind of like the BASF approach. We don't make Linux, we just make it better. We harness through our very bright core group of engineers the tools and resources and technologies available through this development process, this global community of contributors to the technology, and mold from that our specific enterprise operating software. And we choose the enterprise simply because the network, if you will, is forever going to be, I can't say forever, but it will always have this immense role in various verticals. And in the commercial space, we felt that our core service should be in servicing the enterprise as an operating software, as a foundation, and then really collaborating with all the various participants in that architecture, OEMs, ISVs, et cetera, in building this very, very good technology. And our growth is fueled by the merits of that technology, of the value that we provide. It's not charging money so much as a license as we are as a service. And bulk of our business is from support that we provide, from the engineering services that we provide, from training and certification that we provide, from documentation, et cetera, and providing a variety of releases of this OS. I think it's subscription and a service model is continuing to grow. I think many people look at Red Hat as well as a publicly traded for-profit company. How do we do this? How do we build that out? And it's not for everybody, certainly. But as Vijay alluded, our responsibility is that we try to provide technological value to the operating software. It's a freedom of choice of our version versus any other versions out there, and those versions and varieties, if you will, and just in the Linux world itself will continue to grow. And we have a competitive responsibility to make sure that our technology is the best and most relevant technology available. And the services that we wrap around that is also a decision of choice. It's particularly in EDU, schools like to be self-reliant, and especially in higher ed, and they like to develop their own internal knowledge base. And for us, our job, one of our responsibilities is to transfer that knowledge and build out that knowledge base among schools, because that clearly just continues to fuel the comfort level of adoption. As far as my perspective of the implications of open source and the technologies in the EU market, most of my interaction is with CIOs, some degree of sysadmins who kind of actually literally manage the technology day in, day out, as well as other businesses in the market. And I think you still, because of this very, very new technology and culture of open source, it's so emerging that there are many unanswered questions, for vendors, whether, depending on what kind of company and service you provide, some are going to look at open source and development of open source, and it's going to be a competitive threat to a proprietary product. And will open source tools be developed that threatens that, or can they harness the power of the open source development process and make their products and services even better? For schools, it's clearly, as Vijay said, it's just at the end of the day, it boils down to the technology, how good it is and how relevant it is. And but many schools are also looking at, do they actually participate in that process itself? And especially looking at the higher ed market, and a clear example of that is the Sakai project, where schools have said, well, a handful of universities have harnessed their own knowledge base and collaboratively said, we think we can build a better content management system than some of the proprietary companies out there. Now, how sustainable that will be and how well that will be adopted, again, kind of boils down to how valuable that technology ends and how, at the end of the day, and how good it is. Just to add what Vijay mentioned, I think adoption within the EDU space is driven by emotional issues, technological issues, and financial issues. And there certainly is a buzz factor. There's a curiosity. There are many more referenceable schools. There's frustration with many long-standing proprietary applications. But again, end of the day, the technology has to stand up on its own. And so you put all the buzz and the press and all that aside. If the technology is good, the adopters will use it. And I think, secondly, there's certainly financial value. Again, I think a lot of the discussion right now is cost of ownership and is the lowering license fees. But yeah, that's great. But you got to add this support and services and training, et cetera. Does that add up so it's no longer really a return? And again, that's case by case. But I do believe that, like any emerging technology that has legitimate legs now, such as Linux and other open source technologies, at the enterprise level, there's a growing knowledge base, and more schools are taking their own initiative to learn the value of it and implementing it. And a great example, you look at what Jim Klein and Saugus School District did in California, very moderate size, about 11,000 students, but they kind of took the bull by the horns and looked and decided for themselves to implement, and have reaped very great economic and efficiency gains as a result of the technology. I think the administrative computing and academic computing differences, they're kind of different worlds. And administrative computing, which is kind of our world, is all revolved around the network. So again, what we need to do and what we're doing at EDU is similar to what we did and been doing and continue to do in the commercial space, because the network services in EDU are very similar. Networks are gaining in complexity. You've got ERP systems, you have digital content, you have public websites, and the issues of security, data security, especially student data, all these issues, distributed learning, scaling, doing more with less, all these issues are still very important in the network. So for us, our core is providing the advantages there. Academic computing, which is more about student gain, are the academic resources and digital resources and content resources, are they going to be important? Well, that's all about student achievement. Whether those type of resources are proprietary, come out of open source, I think many schools I talk to is really secondary, because it's all about the quality of the content and how valuable that is to achieving student gains. So the pressures, especially the K-12 schools, are under. But again, depending on, as a vendor, which side of that, if you're a software company, what side of that fence you're on, there are different implications as far as open source.
Paige, let me jump in at that point and
Sure.
also invite our audience to come in with their observations and questions. Jordan, will you just recite once again the procedure for asking a question?
If you would like to ask a question, please press 01 on your touch-tone phone. This will place you into a queue. One by one, the lines will be open, so you may each ask your question. So again, that's 01 on your touch-tone phone.
And Paige, while our audience is getting its questions together, I'd like to pose the same question to you that I asked to Vijay, and I think you were moving in that direction when you were making the distinction about academic computing and student achievement as really valued by content, not by technology. But from the experience you've had out in school systems, can you give some advice for the content publishers? And I'm sure you know we're talking not only curricular and instructional content, but testing, school administration, data-driven decision-making, data mining. What do you think is a prudent policy for companies in those spaces at this point and for the next couple of years? And incidentally, anyone else on the panel as well. Paige?
Well, if I'm clear on your question on the implications or kind of some of the thoughts by these companies, one, relevant to our world of Linux and that kind of operating software is, do I get my application certified to run on it? I mean, some schools, some vendors, especially some of the leader vendors may say, well, if my customers aren't asking for it, I'm not going to get it certified. And I don't hear a lot of people asking for Linux, et cetera. And I think some of the decision points there are, well, if there's a growing adoption of Linux, as an example, is it a benefit of getting an application certified from giving me a competitive advantage over other applications, because it is an operating software that is being highly adopted, and to make my product more appealing, I need to make sure that I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to operating software, as an example. So I think that is one area where vendors are trying to decide, especially on the larger scale type enterprise applications like ERP and CRM and SIS and those type of applications. I think that the content folks, the academic curricular content folks, are having a different question: is what is on the competitive landscape? I think is open source process, and are their vendors creating digital content that is going to be a direct competitor at a much more affordable price point than what I have been offering for years. And I think you look at Jimmy and what he's doing, and I mean certainly those kind of questions are coming high up in the chain of thought. So it really just kind of depends on what side of the fence you're on. There are different issues and concerns relevant to administrative or academic computing.
Well, thanks, Paige. Jordan, how about our audience?
We have a question that came in from Orlando, Florida. Your line is now open.
Hi, I'd like to ask this question both to Paige and to Vijay. It's about instructional management systems and what I think you call content management systems. Now, I can see why in college, university level, the take-up of things like Moodle or Sakai might be fairly easy. I'm wondering what you think about that in the K-12 space, where we're seeing some instructional management systems coming in, and whether open source solutions are going to be attractive in the K-12 space.
I think I would say that clearly those organizations are making some headway, and we are open to different products. And when we look at these products, we're looking at functionality. So if an open source product is providing the functionality that we need, we would definitely embrace it. Then comes the issue of reliability, which is how reliable is the software, and we tend to look at the number of deployments, the market share, and what other school districts are using this product for, and we tend to do reference calls, and if all that is supportive, we would fairly evaluate a new product in this arena. And again, also keep in mind each school is very unique when it comes to content, and we're looking for the flexibility and the customizability, and open source provides that. So there you go. If the vendor is willing to make changes or work with us in making the product more flexible and customizable, and also another big thing is interoperability. Content management, integrated learning systems need to integrate with our central data warehouse, our ERP systems, and if all that fits in together, we prefer to have one central database, and that's the whole purpose of ERP and centralization. It'll work great so that we can look at all the changes we're making, whether it's operationally or on process side, and how is it impacting student achievement. So if all these can be tied together, I think it fits very well with our computing model.
And I would to just simply to add to that, I couldn't. I would totally agree with Vijay's points. As I mentioned, kind of at the end of the day, how good, how functional is the technology and the product itself. But in the open source community, that is one of the great advantages that that presents itself for customers as well as vendors who decide that they understand how they can harness the power of software development through open source and create such a product and get this kind of model of participation that really drives the building this quality content and the various functions that Vijay just spoke about. I think there's certainly an argument that could possibly be done at much faster rates than proprietary companies can do, and especially if they get the participation of the EDU community involved, as Sakai has done so well, and building a better mousetrap, essentially. And I think many vendors who understand that opportunity are going to be participating in that, and I think there's clearly a groundswell. The EDU community wants to have as much control and dictation of the quality of the content, because they know better than everybody, having used such a variety of proprietary products, what they like and don't like. And if any company that can harness that participation of that community for feedback and building a better mousetrap is going to have an immense competitive advantage, again, assuming that at the end of the day, the product is at the standards that Vijay spoke about.
Paige, can you describe, or anybody on the panel, some of the more interesting things that you've seen K-12 schools do? I mean, I've seen some talk about Moodle and, about building a better mousetrap kind of issue. Are you seeing it happen, and then does it say that in addition to all the other competition out there, school systems are going to be competition for the traditional vendors?
Well, I think no doubt that I'd say in K-12, I think it's less on the administrative and kind of enterprise side. I think that the great interest and the really rate of interest and adoption, or at least open-mindedness in the K-12 side, is more on the content side, because content and the use of content and its role in achieving student performance is, student performance and accountability is such at the forefront of priorities that they're looking at any kind of content that is high quality, very affordable, and that engages students. I mean, for K-12, their customers are the students. And if the students like it and use it and want it, and teachers are comfortable with it, and really sparks learning, that is where they're gravitating to. And I know Jimmy will be able to speak on that because he certainly his products are certainly at the forefront of that drive.
And if I were to comment on that, I think large school districts are moving towards a 24/7 learning model, and the web-based architecture enables that. So with open source, now you're looking at a new way. The whole way applications are built, I think, is a fundamental change how applications should be built and delivered. And as long as the vendors out there are embracing these open standards and are able to make their product work in an easy fashion, I think it's immaterial as to who the vendor is. And in most of the cases, in a school environment, it's an RFP process where pricing, service, references all play a big factor, and it's not a single person making the decision, but as a group, if all the functionality, the support, all those issues are addressed, then the vendors definitely have a fair chance at winning the contract and being able to provide the school district the right tool.